After witnessing He Yuzhou caring for Bai Yueguang's prenatal examination, Nan Yang threw away a divorce agreement. He sneered, "Divorce, do you deserve it?" His voice, lust were blurred. He didn't have enough fun with her tender and delicate body. He locked her in a cage with the loved ones she cared about the most, and laughed as she withered, and decayed. "He Yuzhou, how can you spare me? I'm tired of waiting." She waited humbly for that day, but his white moonlight killed her father. On the night when he thoughtfully told a story to the child in Bai Yueguang's belly for prenatal education, she held her father's body in the rain and begged for help, watching as the blood spread and was washed away by the rain. She didn't wait. Nan Yang stood barefoot on the deck, and the sea breeze tore through her voice. "He Yuzhou, this life has been given to you. I owe you something, can I still repay it?" He Yuzhou risked his life and only caught a broken corner of his clothes. 3 years later. He Yuzhou searched every corner of the world, his eyes resembling hers and his mouth resembling hers, but none of them happened to be his midnight dream. He was so heartbroken that he wanted to catch her from the deck. He stumbled upon a proposal and couldn't help but stop, only to discover that the female lead was Nan Yang. He forcefully and crazily disrupted someone else's proposal, but carefully grabbed Nan Yang's hand with crimson pupils, pleading, "Can you give me another look?" Nan Yang coldly withdrew her hand and said, "Do you deserve it?" He finally knew how painful Nan Yang was back then. He embarked on a long journey of pursuing his wife and said, Yang, we were once as good as that." Nan Yang sneered, "It's you waiting to get bored. He was humble and had a black stomach. Then you come and seek revenge. If you play with me, play to death." Chapter 1. Nan Yang, did you hit Wen Yan while driving? You are listening at novelfull.audio. There is nothing more ridiculous than a woman enduring the pain of taking progesterone and encountering her husband bringing a pregnant lover for prenatal checkups. Even more ironically, she was still answering her mother-in-law's phone call and said, "Nan Yang, if you don't get pregnant again within 2 months, just wait for the divorce agreement to be signed. The He family can't afford you, a hen that can't lay eggs." Her mother-in-law is known for her dignified and elegant demeanor, gentle and virtuous, yet she repeatedly fails in front of her. She really wanted to say that your son's eggs have been laid, but Ms. Zhanya has angrily hung up the phone. Nan Yang pulled out the needle and silently returned home. Before today, she really wanted to have a child for He Yuzhou. He Yuzhou was the man she had kept in her heart for 7 years, and she never hesitated to humbly offer a girl's grandest love. But now when He Yuzhou walked in with the scent of gardenia flowers, a divorce agreement fell straight on his face, with a paper edge cutting his cheek. His gaze sank and he said, "Nan Yang, where are the rules? I want a divorce." Nan Yang walked to the sofa and sat down, his fingers pinching blood marks from the tiger's mouth. She boldly looked at the man in front of her with a deep temperament and a gloomy expression, and loudly said, "You're all looking for chickens to lay eggs outside. I'm afraid I'll get sick and die if I don't divorce." He Yuzhou pinched a cigarette, rubbed his fingers against the cigarette holder, as if pondering, but in the end, he only said lightly, "Follow me." Nan Yang sneered, his brows tinged with anger. "If you want people to know, unless you don't do it yourself, He Yuzhou, I will make sure that you both have lovers and will eventually get married. Can you stop talking nonsense?" He Yuzhou pulled off his tie and reached out to touch her. Before his cool fingers could touch her, Nan Yang reacted fiercely and slapped his hand. But due to the gesture of raising his hand, he opened his collar, half of his collarbone exposed, half bright and half dark. As if unable to see the sudden darkening of the man's face, Nan Yang continued, "Is it okay to gather and disperse well?" He Yuzhou sat upright, with a slightly mottled expression reflected by the light on one side of his face. His obscure and unclear expression surged with a strong sense of aggression. "Good gathering." Nan Yang opened her mouth and suddenly became speechless. "Yeah. Where is there any good gathering between them?" She calculated on her father to save him, ruined his lifelong reputation, and became the only stain on his beautiful life. Come here. Nan Yang didn't move, but He Yuzhou suddenly pulled her arm and pressed her onto the sofa. His gaze was deep and aroused his desire. Nan Yang was extremely angry. They were clearly discussing divorce, so why did he suddenly fall in heat? Teddy reincarnated. She closed her eyes and grabbed his face, kicked his foot. He Yuzhou, you bastard. He Yuzhou's face was scratched a few times, with a burning pain. His patience reached its limit, and he grabbed Nan Yang's 2 hands with one hand. He easily flipped the person over, lifted her skirt, and pulled down her underwear. He slid his fingers down and grabbed a slippery hand, pressing it against her. His voice was low and despicable. Are you and the bastard going so fast? Anger, shame, and exhaustion intertwined, and she couldn't resist. He Yuzhou, I'm going to divorce you, you're raping me. As he lowered his belt, he merged with her and heard him chuckle softly. His heavy breath climbed onto Nan Yang's skin, making her shudder. Divorce. When you climbed onto my bed with your lewd and rough demeanor, I saved your life for you to kick me. The shirt was torn apart along the collar, revealing a white bra like her, childish and uninteresting, yet it often made him feel like he couldn't extricate himself from chatting. Nan Yang was manipulated by him and fell into the soft sofa. Let go of me, you old man. The man's gaze suddenly swept over her sweaty profile, his black eyes sharp and gloomy, and his movements heavier. Nan Yang didn't want to make a sound. The whimpering that was full of lust would make her even more unbearable. She bit her lips so hard that her crying was silent. The only resistance that people could see was her face full of pear blossoms and rain. Little did they know that this would make men want to ruin her even more. She remained silent. He refused and resorted to all sorts of malicious means. As he had hoped, he heard the sound and held on to her earlobe, saying, shouting so loudly, who raped who? Teacher Nan, The last thing Nan Yang can't accept is when he does something like this with her. He calls her Teacher Nan with a smile, and her profession is like a joke in his mouth. He will be extra long tonight. He also used a lot of awkward positions out of his usual way. Explicitly tormenting her on purpose. On weekdays, he couldn't bear it, let alone intentionally doing it. In her days, Nan Yang felt like she had changed countless places, made countless movements, and finally fell completely asleep. The next day when I woke up, the scorching sunlight passed through the gaps in the curtains, opening the curtain of a dance for the dust in the air. Nan Yang moved her body, her lower abdomen and lower body sore and swollen, and there were even a few areas that felt as painful as being bitten by a dog. She slowly opened her eyes, and the man beside her was no longer there. He Yuzhou, He Laogo. Nan Yang struggled to get up, found her suitcase, opened the wardrobe, and looked at the clear distinction between their clothes. Her nose was sore, and she should have known that they were originally people from 2 different worlds. Their backgrounds, status, age, experiences, circles, lifestyles, and values were all mismatched. Occasionally, on crazy nights, they blended with each other, but they adhered to human desires. After packing her luggage, she received a phone call. The teaching director called and began questioning, "Why aren't you at school?" Nan Yang rubbed her forehead and explained in a low voice, "Director, this Saturday, I plan to go over this afternoon to accompany me to evening self-study." The head teacher scolded, "No wonder your class's grades are not good. You, as a class teacher, are so lazy. Hurry up and go to the hospital. 2 classmates in your class got into a fight and got into the hospital." Nan Yang didn't care about anything and left her suitcase to head straight to the hospital. Every student in this noble high school is a little ancestor. However, the weasel only bit sick ducks. She followed the traffic rules well and was inexplicably hit, causing a series of impacts. However, she was the victim and had urgent matters to attend to, so Nan Yang drove the damaged car all the way to the hospital. Both ancestors have already bandaged their wounds, and seeing Nan Yang, they have become much more honest. Nan Yang took a deep breath and walked over. It's you two again. In your previous life, you two were like a needle and a wheat on, right? Li Yi pointed at Qiu Yunzi and said, Teacher Nan, he scolds me. He scolds my father as Teddy, and even if a mosquito flies past him, she has to cover her buttocks. Nan Yang. Qiu Yunzi spat, you really know how to tell the villains first. Why don't you say that you call me a bastard? You say my mother is the junior leader. Li Yi crossed his waist and said, your mother is 30.5, your father is 60.8. Your family of 3 walking together is like 3 generations of grandparents. Qiu Yunzi was so angry that his face and ears turned red. My parents are in a normal relationship and getting married. They talk like your dad didn't make a young model of the 18th generation. Whoever is as powerful as you, my mom relies on a truck to pull. Nan Yang. Her class is hard to describe in words. Sometimes she is afraid that these children will find someone to kill her and silence her after graduation. After all, she knows too much. Nan Yang interrupted the two with a headache and said, Li Yi, Qiu Yunzi, last time you two fought, how did you promise me? It was definitely the last time, right? We're both 16 years old and not children. You're too embarrassed to listen, I'm too embarrassed to scold you, fight, and hang the lottery. My parents are worried, and even my homeroom teacher is training with you. Is it easy for me? Li Ye's face changed and he said, did the director of education scold you? Nan Yang. Li Yi. Respect the teacher. Before she could finish speaking, the door in front of her was pushed open and a cold, deep voice poured in, Nan Yang, did you hit Wen Yan while driving? Chapter 2. Cannot let her be spoiled by pets. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Li Yi. Teacher Nan, did you crash? Qiu Yunzi. Teacher, are you okay? The man who pushed the door in had a gloomy expression on his face and dark pupils. This was the second time Nan Yang had seen him move and was really angry. The first time was when she knelt naked next to him after successfully climbing the bed. Li Yi and Qiu Yunzi quickly blocked Nan Yang and said, who are you? What are you crazy about? Do you know who I am? Do you know who my father is? He Yuzhou didn't even glance at the 2 young men who didn't even grow their hair. He looked down and said, Nan Yang, answer, why did you bump into someone? She was hit, she was the victim. And now she is standing here, being speculated by her husband with the greatest malice. The purpose is for another woman. She is simply a huge joke. Those unforgettable loves have now turned into weapons piercing her. Inch by inch, she was delayed. Nan Yang, facing his questioning gaze, replied to him word by word, yes, I bumped into her. Who made her shamelessly act as a mistress? I wish I could kill her. Have you already obtained the answer you want? Then get out of here. If I hit someone, the police will handle it fairly. Li Yi and Qiu Yunzi exchanged a glance, clenching their fists in tacit agreement. At the same time, they launched an attack on He Yuzhou and cursed, damn it, scumbag, go to hell. The combined age of the two is actually older than He Yuzhou, but their combined attack power makes He Yuzhou look down on them, and he has no intention of fighting with the 2.5-aged children. Kolia's newborn calf was not afraid of tigers and punched He Yuzhou's jawbone, causing Nan Yang's heart to stagnate for a moment. He Yuzhou's face was dark, and he walked step by step towards Li Yi. Nan Yang was afraid that he would attack the child in anger, so he didn't hesitate to block Li Yi and stared at He Yuzhou with fierce eyes. He Yuzhou stared at her with cold eyes, and she received his calm and majestic anger. Senleng's words spoke out one by one, Nan Yang, you'd better pray for the child's safety. Nan Yang chuckled and said, if I were it, I would rather be stillborn and reincarnated than be born as an illegitimate child who would destroy someone else's family. Nan Yang. His eyelids were red, his jawline was taut, and his anger reached its peak. Men who have always kept their emotions hidden, even when angry, are dull, like black water surging under a 1,000-year-old ice abyss. And now, the appearance of He Yuzhou has made Nan Yang feel the most genuine value he has for this child. Originally, he doesn't dislike the child, he just doesn't like her, so he also doesn't like the child she gave birth to. One night before she discovered her menstrual disorders, there were no condoms at home, and even someone as lustful as him could stop halfway. At that time, he held her and calmed her down, saying that there was still no child in his blueprint. Unfortunately, she actually believed it. Nanyang's heart was shattered and numb with pain. "If I'm guilty, please let the police come and try me." "You can go," she said after she finished speaking. She turned around and looked up high, so that tears wouldn't fall. Her damn constitution of incontinence. An assistant from He Yuzhou ran over and saw Nan Yang. He lowered his voice slightly and said, "Miss Wen is looking for you." He Yuzhou's gaze swept over Nan Yang's back and hurriedly left. Li Yi and Chu Yunze exchanged a glance, but neither of them spoke. After a while, Li Yi said casually, "Teacher Nan, divorce him. I'll introduce you to a good one." Chu Yunze immediately continued, "Yes, Teacher Nan, this man seems to have a tendency towards domestic violence. It's hard to find a three-legged toad, but can't you find a two-legged man? If you want to divorce, I'll ask my dad to help you find a lawyer." He Yuzhou, the gold medal lawyer in Beijing who has never failed since entering the industry, is my dad's friend, said Li Yi, patting his chest and speaking with righteousness. Nan Yang. She calmed down a bit and then looked at the two with a smile on her face. "Can you help me with something now?" Both nodded at the same time. Nan Yang pushed the two of them out and said, "I just beg you to go back to school, listen well, and never fight again, otherwise I will really be fired." Chu Yunze nodded heavily and said, "Don't worry, Teacher Nan. We won't cause you to resign. My mom said that women can have no men, but they can't have careers." Adjacent ward. Wen Yan tightly grasped He Yuzhou's hand, pear blossoms drizzling with rain, tears streaming down her face, and her gaze softened. This was what a woman looked like, not like the one she had just seen. He is not young and has a good temper. Wen Yan was full of happiness for the rest of her life after the disaster. "It scared me to death. I almost thought my baby would have an accident. I walked well on the road, and I don't know why I got hit," she said. He Yuzhou's gaze remained unchanged as he stood by the bed. "I will send you an experienced driver." Wen Yan let out a sigh, even using the soft language of Wu Nong, a young lady from a wealthy family in Jiangnan. She looked at him with fascination, white paired with black pants, wide shoulders and narrow waist, cold and dignified. Just looking at it makes people deeply immersed and unable to extricate themselves. At this moment, Lu Chuan, the assistant of He Yuzhou, negotiated with the police outside and entered with a face full of secrecy. He Yuzhou's gaze fell on Wen Yan's hand, and her face turned red. She quickly let go and heard him say calmly, "I'll go out for a while." Upon hearing this, Wen Yan acted coquettishly and said, "Is there anything I can't listen to? You never avoided me before." He Yuzhou frowned and gestured for Lu Chuan to speak. Lu Chuan said sternly, "The police said that this accident was caused by a private car with a malfunctioning brake running a red light and colliding into his wife's car, and then 2 or 3 times colliding. In addition to his wife, he also collided with 4 cars, and Miss Wen happened to be the last one." He Yuzhou's face changed for a moment. Lu Chuan did not explicitly state that the vehicle in question initially collided with Nan Yang, causing its speed to slow down. The impact on the following vehicles gradually decreased, while the last one was only hit off the front without any deviation. So Miss Wen may be scared, but she definitely won't be hurt. And just when I arrived at the hospital and saw Miss Wen's appearance, I don't know if I thought she was the first priority victim. Wen Yan bit her lips and asked awkwardly, "Did Madam mean her?" He Yuzhou said absent-mindedly, don't think recklessly. Wen Yan lowered her head in frustration and said dejectedly, is our child born out of wedlock? Without any hesitation, He Yuzhou denied, no. This child is absolutely impossible to become an illegitimate child. Wen Yan said hello and her eyes were full of him. Okay, Zhou, you know, I only trust you. After taking Wen Yan home, the air in the car seemed to become thin. He Yuzhou's mind inexplicably conjured up the image of Nan Yang just losing control of her emotions. With open teeth and sharp tongues, like a jumping rabbit, he rarely sees such a lively Nan Yang after 2 years of marriage. Go buy a bag and book a restaurant seat tonight. Lu Chuan hesitated to remind, the director of the regulatory department of a large commercial bank has scheduled a meeting with you tonight. He Yuzhou didn't hesitate and said, go buy a bag. Men can never let women become obstacles in their careers. Lu Chuan quietly glanced at He Yuzhou in the rearview mirror and said, yes. After 10 o'clock in the evening. He Yuzhou was brought back by Lu Chuan, and he drank a little alcohol. After all, his identity was there, and no one dared to drink him. Give her a gift, the degree of slight drunkenness is just right, otherwise she might be proud of being spoiled. He Yuzhou got off the car carrying a bag with a big logo. He knocked at the door. No one came to drive, probably still angry. I don't know who got used to it, but my temper has increased a lot. He Yuzhou frowned and pressed the password, then pushed the door in. Turn on the foyer light, there is a document on the coffee table. He Yuzhou approached and his gaze touched upon a divorce agreement. Chapter 3. He Yuzhou, go to hell with you. You are listening at novelfull.audio. He Yuzhou stood in place for a while, his faint lips curled up, and his cold smile paused for a moment. He sat on the sofa, casually throwing his bag beside him and picking up the divorce agreement. The light was very dim, but he could see it clearly. Reason for divorce. 1. Intramarital affair. The man had an affair with a third party during the marriage, and the marital relationship no longer exists. 2. Disharmony in life. The marital life is disharmonious, and the male partner has a high demand, which the female partner cannot meet. 3. The woman is physically ill, unable to pass on the family line, subjected to insults from the man's family, and suffered irreparable mental damage, feeling anxious and uneasy all day long. In summary, divorce requests are reasonable and legal. He Yuzhou pulled off his tie, loosened a button, and casually tapped his knuckles a few times. He reached into his pocket and took out his cigarette. Until the last one was twisted out by him on the divorce agreement, the living room was filled with thick fog and a burning smell. He grabbed his phone and called Nan Qingshan. Before he could speak, Nan Qingshan's flattering voice quickly spread out, brother.in.law, why did you suddenly call? Did Nan Yang make you angry again? I'll call and scold her later. Not going home. He Yuzhou's voice was distant and indifferent, and he said with a haughty arms, last time I heard you talk to Nan Yang on the phone, you said you wanted your girlfriend to intern at a law firm, and I will arrange it. After cutting off the phone, He Yuzhou called another person and said, find out where Nan Yang is. 1999 bar. Nan Yang's close friend raised his glass in satisfaction, wishing to celebrate with the heavens. Is this the rhythm of my return to favor? I, Nuhulu, am satisfied and about to come back. Nan Yang sat in the dark red single sofa, completely immersed, holding whiskey and looking satisfied. Her black and white eyes narrowed with a smile, and under the rough and colorful lights, her gaze was somewhat blurred. Yes, since she married He Yuzhou, she has spent all her spare time washing her hands and making soup for him, becoming a truly virtuous wife and mother, sacrificing all the time spent with friends. What's in the picture? Yang, cheers. Cheers. The crisp sound of clinking glasses is tingling with joy. With a scream and heavy music, it was deafening to hear as if the roof was about to be overturned. The lead singer on stage took off his denim jacket, shook vigorously, and threw it into the distance. The two of them are so close that they have to shout when speaking. Satisfied with both hands supporting their horns, do you really want a divorce? Nan Yang imitated her appearance and replied loudly, it's like a fake exchange. Eyes curved with satisfaction and joy, celebrating that his best friend was finally leaving the old man with a coffin face all day long. Scum man, go to hell. Nan Yang was stirred up by her emotions, laughing and going crazy. Yes. He Yuzhou, go to hell with you. He Yuzhou. Satisfied and stunned, he looked at the person standing behind Nan Yang, unsure if it was a person or a ghost. Yes, it's He Yuzhou. Go to his mother. Nan Yang's emotions were still in a full state. She stood up from the sofa, waved her hand, and went crazy with everyone, shouting heartlessly and heartlessly, nod yes, shake your head no, meet handsome guy say hello, others fall in love early, I go to bed early, I am my brother's little baby. Satisfied and desperately frowning, He Yuzhou, He Yuzhou, He Yuzhou. Nan Yang laughed foolishly at her and said, a qualified ex should have died on the day of divorce. If we don't mention him, what if we cheat? Before she could finish speaking, a black shadow flashed before her eyes. Before Nan Yang could react, the person had already lifted her up. Nan Yang, who had just poured a belly full of alcohol, immediately turned her head down, her stomach pressed against her shoulder, and the liquid inside shook back and forth. She shed uncomfortable tears and said, satisfied, satisfied, help. Even though he was afraid of He Yuzhou, he still had to do everything for his sisters. Satisfied, he bravely rushed to He Yuzhou and opened his arms to block his way. You let Yang go, otherwise I won't be polite to you, he said. He Yuzhou gave her a contemptuous glance, his high eyebrows and eyes disdainful. He casually pushed and brushed the person to the ground, then turned his foot in satisfaction. Although he grinned in pain, he still chased after her. He Yuzhou, what do you dare to do to Yang? I'll curse you for a lifetime of impotence. Nan Yang was rudely pushed into the passenger seat by him, and He Yuzhou stepped on the clutch and engaged the gear, released the handbrake, started the engine, and the car ran on the main road, throwing satisfaction behind the car. He occasionally glanced at Nan Yang. Nan Yang's head became slightly clearer and he began to struggle, even grabbing his face. He Yuzhou, you let me down, you stop, he said. Of course, He Yuzhou never stops. Instead, brake at maximum speed. Nan Yang, said Nan Yang, taking advantage of her strong drinking spirit in grabbing the steering wheel. The car skidded on the road, and the coffin face of He Yuzhou's Gu Jing Wubwa finally showed signs of fluctuation. Nan Yang. The two of them came and went, and the car was crashing on an empty road to avoid hitting people. He Yuzhou simply turned the steering wheel and drove the car into the woods on the roadside. The land that had just rained was soft, and the wheels were deeply stuck in it, unable to extricate themselves. The development of the matter exceeded his imagination. He Yuzhou was restless in his heart, and the gloom in his black eyes was evident. Are you satisfied? Nan Yang was so angry that she bared her teeth at him. He is always accustomed to using his ability to work like a fish in water on her. The collision is like this. Now too. Imposing all the responsibility on her without distinction. Nan Yang felt aggrieved, but she didn't want to say much to him. Apart from the divorce, there's nothing we can say to each other, she said. He Yuzhou's cold gaze fixed on her. He is already a few years older than her, with a lot of experience, a heavy mind, and a dirtier heart and methods. Although Nan Yang was afraid in her heart, her face remained unmoved. Cold and restless, Nan Yang nestled her small body in the seat and lay flat. She blinked. It was obvious that she had not yet realized this episode. The culprit had already turned over from the side, with his hands pressed on top of her head, and his hand passed over her soft waist, which was not tightly clenched. She is not short, even tall among girls, but every time she nests in his arms, she feels small, soft and weak. He sees a bright red mole on her translucent earlobe, like a red plum falling in the snow, which is particularly eye-catching. He Yuzhou, you bastard. Shoo. He took a light bite on her lips and said, well behaved, there are even more jerks. Nan Yang was moved by his fingers, tears welling up in her eyes, and her seductive eyes were like silk. She scolded him for being a jerk, as if she was acting coquettish. He brushed her soft waist, blooming all the way, lifted her skirt, buried his head in admiration, and finally, seeing her eyes blurred to the point of causing mental turmoil, he completely suppressed and lifted one of his legs. Lawyer He, who was at ease in his career, remained the same in matters of love. Nan Yang frowned tightly and bit his shoulder. He Yuzhou, you go out, stallion, Teddy Jing, stolen cucumber. He moved forward instead of retreating, hooking her chin and kissing her with a hint of bitterness. Nan Yang, at this moment, it's best to shut up, he said, we got divorced. Humiliation is a bit more than confusion, making her cry a little bit of grievance. He Yuzhou, we're divorced, you can't treat me like this. He Yuzhou caressed her smooth and delicate neck, her face as cold as a Buddha, with a hint of blush on it. I haven't signed, what's the point of getting divorced? She glared at him and said, then I'll sue you. He Yuzhou sneered, what are you suing me for? Misconduct within marriage. Did you catch a rape in bed? Is marital life disharmonious? Listen, is this considered disharmonious? He deliberately bumped into her vigorously, and the sticky sound of water echoed in his ears. Isn't it harmonious? Chapter 4. Dating. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Under strong criticism, Nan Yang curled up her toes with force. One of her bright white feet stepped on the center console, while the other was wrapped around his waist along with her calves. The repeated strong impacts made her whole body tense. He Yuzhou was almost pressed out. He pinched her chin and swept into her mouth for a while. Then he lifted her back neck with one hand and pressed it against his chest, moving rapidly. Nan Yang suddenly opened her mouth and bit into his chest. He Yuzhou, is the child in her belly? Yes, is it yours? He paused for a moment, his scorching breath spraying on the top of Nan Yang's hair. He explained himself before giving Nan Yang a reply. He hugged her trembling body tightly, his hands soft and delicate. He felt a little satisfied and slowly said, yes. Nan Yang's ears trembled slightly. Her scorching body suddenly cooled down, even with a mournful sob between her breaths, gradually spreading her grievances and sorrows. He Yuzhou, I hate you, I want a divorce. You can say that you don't like her. You can say that you like others. She can convince herself to give him a decent ending. Instead of dirtying and killing the marriage she had been hoping for since childhood, as it is now. It was supposed to be easy to gather and disperse. But now, as long as she looks back at her marriage, calculations, expediency, cold violence, infertility, infidelity, third parties, illegitimate children are pouring in. Even though there were still ambiguous bite marks on his open chest, the expression on He Yuzhou's face didn't seem to make people speculate on what had just happened. Nan Yang, I said, divorce, you don't have the right to bring it up. He has been admired by many since childhood as a proud son of heaven. His future and career are all under his control, and every step he takes is the result of his careful judgment. Only Nan Yang. She disrupted his balance in controlling life and unexpectedly entered his life in a despicable way. He was forced to accept it, which was already self-consistency with himself. He failed to grasp the appearance of Nan Yang. But he has overwhelming control over this marriage. Nan Yang is more and more eager to divorce. The more he refuses to let her go as he wishes. He wanted her to taste the feeling of having to walk forward on a one-way street. He Yuzhou lowered his eyes and looked at her, staring blankly at the shadows of stars seeping through the roof glass, like a broken rag doll. He Yuzhou suddenly lifted her leg and Nan Yang kicked her weakly. Beast. He easily gripped her ankles with one hand and sarcastically said, what are you, who was attacked by a beast. There was a hint of tide in Nan Yang's eyes, and she glared at him in anger, feeling both aggrieved and stubborn. Her delicate little face had a blush left by intense love, and her dark eyes were like huge black holes. She felt like she had rushed into an airtight net like a moth to the fire, but now she seemed to have broken her wings and couldn't fly out. Feeling extremely tired and sad, Nan Yang couldn't help but close her eyes. Wake up early the next morning. The refreshing scent of the pine trees after snow lingered around her nostrils, and the feather chandelier she looked up at was her own choice. Remind her that this is the Yunting mansion where the two of them lived after marriage. He Yuzhou is no longer by his side, I don't know where he went. Nan Yang took a sniff, got up, and immediately found her phone. Her phone has been muted. 18 missed calls, all from Satisfaction. She dialed back to her Satisfaction, who opened her mouth and asked, Yang, are you okay? Nan Yang let out a sigh, and only then did she realize how hoarse her voice was. Don't worry, she said after listening to the commotion with satisfaction, I naturally understood everything. This dog wants to eat in the bowl and look at the pot. Nan Yang's self-deprecating smile. Satisfied and probing, he asked, that. My baby, do you have any classes in the morning? Nan Yang was amused by her deliberately teasing tone, and her mood became clearer. Say, she said with a mournful cry of satisfaction, he pleaded repeatedly, Jianhu is in urgent need. Do you remember the senior I talked to you about a few days ago insisting on introducing me to someone? He suddenly scheduled a meeting with me at noon today, and I can't leave. You go help me deal with it, and I'll tell him later. I don't think we're suitable, so I beg you. Nan Yang chuckled and got out of bed, rubbing her neck and neck with her hand. Am I a married woman going on a blind date? After taking a satisfied sip of coffee and shaking his head, his voice echoed as he said, It's okay. Besides, you're not getting divorced soon. When you get divorced, you won't be able to escape this. Let's experience it in advance. Senior, I can't afford to offend you, but if I go on a blind date, at the noon meeting, our group's little Bailian will take credit for it again. My mother has been fucked twice by her, so there must be no third time. The bonus will be paid this time, and I will invite you to soak in hot springs. As she spoke, she became more and more anxious. Nan Yang responded, Okay, send me the address and location. 11:30 Nan Yang arrived at the restaurant on time and followed the table number to find it. The man sitting at the table was dressed in a sophisticated suit, with a gentle temperament and a warm warmth between his eyebrows and eyes. He seemed to have a good temper, and a pair of gold-framed glasses added a touch of elegance to the warm man's foundation. Although sitting, judging from his curled legs, he is very tall. Nan Yang pondered that this would make Mani see it at first sight. Although she had a fondness for her younger brother, there were always exceptions. Nan Yang walked over and said, Hello, is Mr. Chu correct? Qianfan's gaze fell on her face. He was stunned for a moment, then stood up and gentlemanly helped Nan Yang open the chair. Please take a seat, he said after sitting down. Qianfan handed over the menu and said, I ordered a few dishes, but I'm not sure if they suit your taste. Take a look at the menu and order whatever you want. Nan Yang politely took over the menu and said, It's okay, I can do anything. Qianfan's eyes lit up, and he stared at Nan Yang just right, then moved away just in time. Did it take up your work time? I've been too busy lately, he said. He spoke in a pleasant and gentle voice, unlike He Yuzhou, whose words had not yet come out and a sense of oppression had already emerged. He spoke fluently, like a narrator listening to a book. Nan Yang took a deep breath and felt embarrassed to pretend to be such a gentle person. Mr. Chu, I'm sorry, I'm not satisfied. I'm her friend. She was too busy today and tried to negotiate with her supervisor for a long time, but she couldn't take a leave. She's afraid you'll be waiting here for a long time, so let me come over and talk about it. Say it. The sense of guilt instantly subsided. What she didn't expect was that Qianfan laughed and said in a clear voice, "I have seen Miss Man's work photos before. Since you entered the door, have I called you Miss Man Teacher Nan?" Nan Yang's back feels numb. Qianfan reached out her hand, her fingers slender and beautiful. "Let's get to know each other again, Teacher Nan. My name is Qianfan, and I'm from your classmate Yuzhou. Nephew, there's no way he can do it. He does have a great seniority. Nan Yang. What a big nephew. No, what a big black dragon. Behind the semi-transparent screen partition, not far away. Wen Yan smiled and patted He Yuzhou's arm, gesturing for him to turn his head. "Look, it's Qianfan, he's on a blind date." He Yuzhou let out a sigh, his gaze deep and proud, not knowing what he was thinking. Wen Yan chuckled and called out to him, "Yuzhou, I'm talking to you. Did you hear me?" He Yuzhou looked up calmly and said, "What?" Wen Yan patiently repeated, "I said, let's go over and say hello to Qianfan." Chapter 5. Is Teacher Nan so desired and dissatisfied? You are listening at novelfull.audio. By the way, let's see what kind of fairy can make him come for a blind date. Before, I always heard my aunt complain, and they all suspected that Qianfan didn't like women anymore. Go, go, go. Let's go. Wen Yan had already stood up, pulling He Yuzhou's arm to act coquettishly. The latter's gaze fell on her still flat belly, then got up and followed Wen Yan to Qianfan. He didn't have much interest at first, lazily hanging his eyes until he saw the damn Nan Yang sitting opposite Qianfan. The fatigue and laziness all over his body instantly dissipated, and his solemn gaze landed on Nan Yang's face without hesitation, making the air thin and heavy. "Ha! Very good. I can't wait to find a home now." Nan Yang didn't expect to carry her back to her grandmother's house today, and even at such times, she could run into He Yuzhou by chance. Who cannot praise a bad fate? Her scalp was tingling with the gaze of He Yuzhou catching a traitor. If he comes to eat with his pregnant mistress openly and honestly, does he have a reason? Are you still preemptive now? Playing is a great double standard. Nan Yang clenched her hands silently under the table, dog man. Qianfan didn't expect to encounter He Yuzhou here either. "It's a coincidence, Yuzhou, Yan," he said when Yan took He Yuzhou's arm and playfully blinked, "Can't you introduce us to her? Is this a girlfriend?" Qianfan quickly denied that he didn't want to cause trouble for Nan Yang, so he wanted to introduce Nan Yang as Teacher Yuzhou. "No, this is me." Before Qianfan could finish speaking, Wen Yan interrupted him with a meaningful look and said, I understand, everyone understands. Although I'm not a girlfriend yet, it will be over soon." Qianfan smiled helplessly and said, "You misunderstood, this." Wen Yan's whole body was almost pressed against He Yuzhou's body, and her voice was soft. "Azhou, do you think Qianfan and this sister are particularly compatible?" He Yuzhou suddenly sneered, "Perfect match." Nan Yang was stabbed in the eyes by their affection, and then in the heart by his words. In his eyes, was she so lowly from beginning to end? Not worthy of him, nor worthy of his friends. To their world, she is a cheap commodity that they cannot afford. After 2 years of marriage, she had never met any of his friends, and even Ms. Zhangye came to humiliate her. It was only then that she found out about his identity besides being a gold medal lawyer. Nan Yang seemed to be bound by an invisible force, exerting all her strength, but only managed to obtain fresh air that allowed her to breathe. Wen Yan. Qianfan knew that He Yuzhou's temperament was not very good from a young age, but he still had some basic cultivation outside, and he didn't know what was going on today. He spoke so harshly, and he apologized. Zhou is right. Teacher Nan is excellent, and I don't deserve her for the time being." He Yuzhou's position leaned towards Nan Yang, and he casually scanned behind her seat with his fingers. "Does Teacher Nan think the same?" Wen Yan silently pinched her finger joints. Nan Yang raised her eyes and her gaze fell on Wen Yan's small face. I really don't match Mr. Chu. Mr. Chu has a beautiful and elegant appearance, and is young and promising. Where can I afford it? He Yuzhou exclaimed in confusion, what kind of climbing does teacher Nan want? Let me introduce it to you. Nan Yang's gaze shifted to his face and she smiled, lust-filled trash, after all, I'm pretty good. He Yuzhou didn't speak anymore, his cold fingers accidentally brushed over her shoulder, and Nan Yang stiffened in place. Qianfan coughed lightly and felt slightly displeased. Azhou, you scared teacher Nan. He Yuzhou was calm, are you so timid? Nan Yang couldn't sit still after all. She suddenly stood up and said, sorry, you guys talk first. I'll go to the restroom. She picked up her bag and left. Nan Yang rushed into the bathroom eagerly, splashing cold water on her face. The icy sensation made her regain her soul. She stared at the awkwardness in the mirror, panting heavily. Slowly. The second person's figure was reflected in the mirror. After grinding her teeth, Nan Yang wanted to bite off his neck, bite off his major artery, and let it all go. He Yuzhou approached her, closely behind her, with one hand wrapped around her soft waist, and a dangerous aura instantly approached. You've grown your skills, you're going to hook up with men. It wasn't originally intended that way, and in this situation, Nan Yang couldn't possibly explain, what's wrong. You're only allowed to keep the red flag at home, while the colorful flags are flying outside. He Yuzhou, Shuangbiao was struck by lightning. Under the manipulation of his fingers, Nan Yang couldn't help but snort and quickly bit her lip. He Yuzhou chuckled inwardly and said, Teacher Nan is so sensitive. He can handle even garbage. Nan Yang's voice was coquettishly affected by him, and she gritted her teeth and said, it's just a physiological reaction. Adults will have it. Although you may not be as quiet and sensible as a massage stick, at least you don't have to move on your own. A little is better than nothing, and it's nothing to entertain yourself. She used him as a massage stick. As a pastime thing. He Yuzhou was angrily laughed at by Nan Yang, picking her chin and making her look at her blushing face in the mirror with a low voice. Do Nan's students know that Nan is so dissatisfied with her desires? Nan Yang looked at his steady and self-sufficient appearance in the mirror and sneered, do lawyer his clients know that lawyer he likes to break the law so much? He Yuzhou opened his eyes to look at her, staring at her face. His small face was as big as a palm, with a hint of malice in its grievances, like a little milk dog that had been kicked in the buttocks. He waved his teeth and claws, without much deterrent power. When did you speak so eloquently? Nan Yang remained silent. When I used to treat him as a treasure, I had to consider everything I said, be obedient and trembling. Afraid of offending him. Do you still want such preferential treatment now? What is the difference between wanting a son and a eunuch? The same delusions. Thinking of the past, my heart throbbed uncontrollably and said, let go of me. He Yuzhou hugged her tighter, his chin pressing against her shoulder, and the air was filled with a suffocating smell. Get in my car, he said Nan Yang. Dream. He Yuzhou chuckled and flicked away the broken hair that had fallen from her. Why aren't you being obedient? Nan Yang. Disgusting. She used to be so well behaved, because she calculated his guilt and felt grateful for saving her father, but more importantly, it was because of the sense of inferiority in front of him. He is too outstanding and a few years older than her. His extraordinary abilities and experience are worth looking up to by Nan Yang. But now only disgust mixed with betrayal remains. He Yuzhou let out a sigh, his hand's movements intensified, but his other hand took out his phone and made her watch helplessly. He pressed the number of Nanping and said, find a helper. Looking at the call time of midnight on the phone screen, Nan Yang's heart was lifted up. Xiaohe. The cautious voice of Nanping is a microcosm of the attitude of the entire Nanjia towards He Yuzhou. Nan Yang felt sad in her heart. Marriage that goes too far without proper household registration can lead to head injuries and blood loss. When the person you love has the ability to control everything you have, this relationship is destined to be abnormal from the beginning. Nan Yang wanted to speak, but He Yuzhou covered her mouth and threatened in her ear, "Are you good or not? Xiaohe. Are you listening? Is it Yang? Why?" Nan Yang nodded vigorously with wet eyes, and only then did He Yuzhou smile and let go of her. "Dad, Yang and I will come to see you for dinner this weekend," he said. Nanping exclaimed in surprise several times. Okay, I'll make you oil-braised prawns to eat." After cutting off the phone, He Yuzhou patted her buttocks in a good mood and said, "Go ahead, you recognize the car." Chapter 6. Mr. He looks like a licking dog now. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Chu Qianfan received a text message from Nan Yang to leave first, as expected. He feels particularly sorry. Immediately reply to Nan Yang. "Teacher Nan, I have wronged you today. I hope Teacher Nan can give me a chance to apologize to you in person. My friend doesn't usually do this." After sending, Chu Qianfan looked at Wen Yan in front of her and asked, "Is Yuzhou in a bad mood today?" Wen Yan played with the jade bracelet on her wrist, which had a high water head. "Your friend has been wronged. Next time, I'll invite you to sing," she said. Chu Qianfan couldn't be harsh either. "Are you with Yuzhou? I didn't expect that after all, you were still together." Wen Yan nodded forcefully. Chu Qianfan was also happy for them. "Congratulations, we are waiting for further good news from you." Wen Yan was about to say "you too" when she suddenly received a call from Lu Chuan. "Miss Wen, there is an urgent case that He needs to handle. I will wait for you in place. You can come directly later." Wen Yan lowered her eyes and unconsciously picked at the broken diamonds on her bag with her fingers. Put down your phone." She smiled and gave Chu Qianfan some advice. "I see you're interested in Teacher Nan. As someone who has been here, I'll teach you a trick. Chasing girls shouldn't be too gentlemanly, and you shouldn't be too slow. When it's time to rush, you should hold on to it, such as sending flowers, arranging meals, drinking coffee, watching movies, and in any case, you should be impenetrable." Chu Qianfan smiled and remained silent. He Yuzhou got on the car and locked it. Nan Yang sneered from the side, "He Yuzhou, the way you are persistently pestering me now even makes me suspect that you have fallen in love with me. You love me so much that you can't do without me, like a licking dog." He Yuzhou leaned on the steering wheel and turned his head to look at her. "Just now it was garbage, but now it's like a licking dog again. Will I change 72 times? He started Koreanum and ran steadily on the road. Nan Yang angrily stared out the window, giving him a round back of the head. He Yuzhou tooted, and did not take her anger to heart at all, or he was so conceited that he was sure Nan Yang would bow his head and even put down the steps for her. "I will eat you to make yam and pumpkin congee in the evening." Nan Yang sneered, not looking at his face. "I won't even cook for you even if I cook for the dog. Also, I won't go back to Yunting Mansion. Please take a look at the divorce agreement I have drafted, sign it quickly, and give your third sister and illegitimate son a complete home." After hearing this, He Yuzhou remained silent for 2 seconds and said, I won't divorce." Nan Yang angrily turned around and said, "Are you sick? What do you really want to do?" Seeing a red light, He Yuzhou stopped and said, "A lascivious garbage, all I want to do is women. Your skin bag is to my taste, and I'm not tired of it for now. I'm tired of you. A dog without social morality." Nan Yang took a deep breath, frowned, "Then I'll have to go to your law firm to pull a banner. The famous lawyer, he is aware of the law and committed bigamy, causing you to lose your job. Go to your Miss Wen's community again and display a banner, openly accepting a concubine in the name of the main room. However, it seems that your Miss Wen is pregnant. What if she gets too emotional and her child has problems, then what should she do? Prickle, Rubber tires rub against asphalt ground, making a harsh and rough sound. Qianfan stopped by the roadside. Due to inertia, Nan Yang collided heavily with the seat from behind, giving her a strong sense of pushback. The teasing on He Yuzhou's face was completely absent, replaced by his strong threat, which was the usual iron-fisted method and collusion used by those in power. Nan Yang, what dare you do to Wen Yan and her child? Don't blame me for touching your family, he said. A word stuck in her throat, swollen to the point of suffering, and she said, since you're so precious to their mother and son, why can't you let me go? She is still his wife, she just said a harsh word to the women outside, and he felt so sorry for her. He didn't know that she didn't just love him for 2 years. In that day after day of waiting, she turned herself into an unpleasant joke, saying that love can overcome all difficulties, and it turned out to be only limited to mutual love. Nan Yang took a deep breath, but couldn't let go of her tears. I did something wrong, just treat it as if I had redeemed myself in 2 years, okay? Tears filled her eyes as she pleaded softly, He Yuzhou, I apologize, okay? I can accept that you hate me, I can accept that you don't love me, and I can accept that you deliberately ignore me. But I can't accept that you got off a woman's bed and then onto my bed. Marriage shouldn't be like this. Nan Yang arched her body in sadness, her head buried low, and bitter and strong tears fell on the car carpet one by one. Like someone taking out her heart, soaking it in pickled water, dehydrating it, and drying it up. He Yuzhou is inexplicably restless. He lit a cigarette with one hand holding a lighter, and nicotine sucked into his internal organs. The facial features covered by the smoke became more three-dimensional, lacking a hint of coldness and sharpness. He has never seen Nan Yang like this before. Even if her father is sick, she can pretend to be strong and take care of herself. Even under the harsh treatment of Ms. Zhangya, she was able to digest it well and turned her head to show her face to him, smiling as brightly as peach blossoms. She was a bit younger when she was with him, but she never needed to be taken care of. Apart from her delicate body, he didn't even realize that she was 6 years younger than him. He disappeared for a moment through the mist, pinched her chin, lifted her face, and looked at her bitten lip. His expression darkened a bit. Nan Yang, if you don't come to me voluntarily for a month, I promise to divorce. Nan Yang suddenly looked up and spoke nervously, this is what you said. You can't go back on your word. He Yuzhou sneered in response to her. Nan Yang immediately said, I'll see you at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau today at 9:00 a.m. on March 20th and April 20th. She couldn't wait to get off the car and slammed the door away. Nan Yang originally thought she would not see this bottle of plague god for the next month, but she never expected that this man would appear in her office that afternoon. A girl group named Kujiqing bullied Bai Miao in her class. Yesterday, during lunch break, they locked Bai Miao in the toilet, splashed water, scolded, and humiliated her. However, she happened to catch her and asked Bai Miao repeatedly, only to find out that this was already the 3rd time. She immediately called Kujiqing's guardian and arranged to meet in the office this afternoon. Kujiqing pushed open the door and said with a smile, Teacher Nan, my family is here. Immediately after, He Yuzhou and Wen Yan walked in at the same time. Nan Yang's smile froze at the corner of her mouth. Is He Yuzhou the parent of Kujiqing? It's very obvious. Not only was she surprised, but Wen Yan smiled and shook her head in shock. Oh my goodness. Teacher Nan, you are actually Qingqing's homeroom teacher. Azhou, didn't you expect such a coincidence to happen in the world? Nan Yang's dark eyes were hazy with a layer of mockery, what is this? If she knew her true relationship with He Yuzhou, she would probably go crazy. What a coincidence, Teacher Nan. He Yuzhou's deep eyes pointed to a faint danger. Teacher Nan rolled out of his deep throat, especially with a meaningful expression, which made Nan Yang's back feel cold. Nan Yang thought for a moment, this is because he came to find him on his own initiative, not because he went to find him on his own. What are you afraid of? With a straight back, he is just an ordinary parent of a student. Nan Yang coughed lightly and casually grabbed a student outside the office door, asking someone to call Bai Yueguang over. Then she walked towards the two of them, doing business and saying, I don't know who the two are from Qianfan. Wen Yan looked at Nan Yang with a smile on her face, with a harmless expression on her face. Qianfan is the youngest daughter of my uncle's family and currently lives in my house. My mother is not available today, so she asked me to come and handle it. Teacher Nan, did Qianfan cause you any trouble? Miss Wen, please sit down first. He Yuzhou's pitch-black gaze wandered around the office, casually pulling a chair and sitting down, her gaze fixed on Nan Yang's desk. On her desk, she placed a small doll, two connected big-headed dolls, one with an N and the other with an H. Wen Yan also saw it and asked curiously, Teacher Nan, is this H the code name for your significant other? Nan Yang sat in front of the two and said, yes, my ex-husband. Ex-husband. Wen Yan looked surprised and said, are you divorced? Wen Yan is sitting here today as a parent of a student, and it is obvious that she is not aware of it. No teacher wants to talk to their parents about their personal matters, so Nan Yang casually said, the grass on my ex-husband's grave is 2 meters high. Chapter 7. Where were you moaning the night before yesterday? You are listening at Novel Full.audio. This made Wen Yan blush and feel helpless. She panicked and explained, Teacher Nan, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to talk about your sadness. I'm really sorry, I'm sorry. Bai Yueguang deliberately glanced at He Yuzhou, tucked his hair behind his ears, and said in a warm and gentle voice without any ups and downs, it's okay, he's not a good person either. He's going to set off firecrackers to celebrate after leaving the sea of suffering. This can't be considered a bad thing. He Yuzhou sneered, birds of a feather flock together. Wen Yan immediately pulled his sleeve slightly and said, Ah Zhou. She gestured to He Yuzhou not to say anything, after all, this seemed to be saying that Teacher Nan was not good and very offensive to him. Nan Yang admitted nonchalantly, this gentleman is right. He has poor character, and my vision is poor. Isn't that why we all come together? Now that my vision is good, and his character is even worse, I naturally have to take a plane and run away. He Yuzhou rubbed his fingertips in displeasure. Coincidentally, Bai Yueguang knocked on the door and entered. Wearing a loose school uniform, Bai Yueguang saw Qianfan dressed in a tall outfit. She tightened the corners of her clothes with both hands and walked to Nan Yang with her head down and her back arched. Teacher Nan, she said. Nan Yang held Bai Yueguang's hand and said to Wen Yan, this is Bai Yueguang. Qianfan's small gang has bullied Bai Yueguang's classmates twice. Yesterday noon, Qianfan locked Bai Yueguang in the bathroom again and poured water into it with a bucket. Miss Wen, this matter has been seriously affected. Before she could finish her words, Wen Yan's eyes turned red. Teacher Nan, I really didn't know that Qianfan had done such an outrageous thing at school. She instinctively caressed her lower abdomen. He Yuzhou frowned and asked in a cold and piercing tone, just tell me how to handle it. Nan Yang lowered her eyes and sneered, He Yuzhou really cares about the child in Wen Yan's belly. After all, it is also the crystallization of love nurtured by one's dearest woman, who doesn't like it. Nan Yang sat up straight and said in a business tone, Qianfan will write a self-reflection and apologize. I will truthfully report to the school and give Qianfan a serious warning. I hope that Qianfan can take it as a warning and reflect seriously. On Saturday, I will take Bai Yueguang to the hospital for a check-up, and you will be responsible for all the check-up costs. In addition, the education of the child needs to be handled by both the school and parents. I hope that parents can participate and most effectively prevent such incidents from happening again. Wen Yan gave Qianfan a disappointed glance. Qianfan exclaimed loudly, I was just joking with her. Teacher Nan, are you going to go online like this? Wen Yan clenched her fists in anger and said, Qianfan, why are you talking to Teacher Nan? Apologize to Teacher Nan. If you continue like this, why don't you just go home so that your parents don't blame the Wen family for spoiling you in the future? Kujiqing saw that Wen Yan was really angry, and she was also afraid of being thrown home. After much thought, she bowed to Nan Yang and reluctantly said, Teacher Nan, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have yelled at you. I promised you all your demands, and I will sincerely apologize to Bai Miao Miao and reflect on myself. After listening to Kujiqing's last sentence, Bai Miao Miao's back became cold, and her head lowered even more. Nan Yang encouraged Bai Miao Miao and said, You go back to class first, everything has a teacher. Bai Miao Miao looked at Nan Yang's gaze with a strong sense of gratitude and said, Kujiqing rolled her eyes and said, Teacher, I'm also going back to class. My grades are already poor, and if I miss out on my studies, I won't be able to catch up. Nan Yang nodded sternly and said, Kujiqing, you will be my key subject of observation next. I hope you sincerely repent. If you do it again, it will not be just a warning. Kujiqing let out a muffled It's really mind your own business. As Kujiqing walked out of the office, Wen Yan stood up and said, Teacher Nan, I'll go talk to Qingqing for a while. Zhou, can you help me ask about Qingqing's grades and academic progress? Wen Yan chased after Kujiqing with her hind legs. There are only 2 people left in the office. He Yuzhou's gaze once again fell on the small ornament. Nan Yang bent down to take it and put it in her pocket. She said in a daze, Do you want to see Kujiqing's monthly exam results? The chill on He Yuzhou's face slowly faded, but his words remained yin and yang. Am I idle? Nan Yang stood up and said, Then you go out. He Yuzhou pulled her over. Nan Yang's face was stunned. She glanced at the office door and then gritted her teeth and stared at him. He Yuzhou, don't go crazy. He Yuzhou pressed her waist against his leg, and Nan Yang's pale face clenched her fist against his shoulder. Aren't you afraid Miss Wen will see stimulation? He didn't answer the question and acted recklessly. I want to know when I went to the grave to make peace. Nan Yang choked. His scorching breath landed at the corner of her eye. 2 meters tall is the grass on the grave. Did you moan under the ghost the night before yesterday? Nan Yang. His equally fiery palm burned on her soft waist, and Nan Yang couldn't break free from his grip. Okay, then let your little lover see clearly who that 2-meter-tall rotten person on the grave grass is. She went crazy and kissed his lips. After 2 years of marriage, her most proactive move was just a fleeting taste of water. Often, before He Yuzhou even realized it, she blushed and shrunk her neck, vividly portraying herself as a young girl in love. He Yuzhou has never seen her face as a little crazy before. Her unskilled kissing skills can almost be described as rotten, rampaging and occasionally hitting his gums with her teeth, causing him to frown in pain. Such a southern teacher is really rare. He Yuzhou's eyebrows and eyes flashed with a hint of darkness. He pinched her neck with one hand and taught her what a deep kiss is. His hands were delicate and gentle, touching. Nan Yang was confined in his arms by him, unable to move at all. She put on a life-and-death fight today, showing Wen Yan the truth and letting her firmly control him from now on. Don't let her fool around in front of her, she's disgusting. At the same time, Nan Yang's ears were also raised, constantly paying attention to the movements at the door. Cold but not ding, He Yuzhou's phone came in for a call. He Yuzhou held the back of her head in one hand and pressed her rosy face against his chest, taking the time to answer the phone. Wen Yan's soft voice came from inside, I'm downstairs now. You should come down quickly, wait for you. Nan Yang wakes up like a dream. She kissed for nothing. Unable to wait to get off He Yuzhou's arm was wrapped in iron, making her unable to move. His gaze oppressed her, and Nan Yang understood that he was afraid of making a sound and stimulating Wen Yan. Wait a moment. Hang up the phone. Nan Yang gave him a scolding and said, You already knew. He Yuzhou chuckled and said, What do you know? Do you know that you want to pounce on me and kiss me? He said, gently stroking Nan Yang's back and spine. Judging from Nan Yang's demeanor, do you want to get a divorce shot in advance? Hit your head. There were footsteps and voices outside the door, and He Yuzhou stared at Nan Yang's panicked face with a deep and interested gaze. He waited for the moment when the door was pushed open before Nan Yang landed steadily on the ground. 2 teachers came in. That's the basic situation of the child, Nan Yang said as she looked at He Yuzhou with a stern expression. He Yuzhou stood up, and the Zegna Gaoding suit only had a slight crease on it. He looked at Nan Yang with a distant and cold gaze, as if treating a stranger. Teacher Nan, I have benefited a lot today. Goodbye, he said. Chapter 8 Mr. He. Role-playing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Saturday. Nanyang took Bai Miao to see a psychologist. While she was waiting outside the department door, Wen Yan arrived. Nature. There is no place without He Yuzhou, the flower protection envoy, where there is Wen Yan. Wen Yan smiled brilliantly, just like the scorching summer sun, making people reluctant to look straight in the eye. Teacher Nan, I know you took Bai Miao to see a psychologist today, and it happened that Zhou was with me for a physical examination. I came over to prepare to pay for the medical expenses. Teacher Nan, you are so kind to the students. You are a blessing to the students. Wen Yan sat down next to Nan Yang. He Yuzhou turned around and walked to the window behind the 2 of them to make a phone call, leaving behind a cold and straight figure. It looks very busy. Wen Yan couldn't help but shake her head and said, I've been telling him since last night that I can do it alone, but he didn't feel at ease and insisted on coming to accompany me. I'm not a 3-year-old anymore, and he still values me so closely. Nan Yang lowered her eyes and stared at the tip of her shoes, her voice faint and distant. Your husband loves you. The man on the phone glanced sideways at the back of Nan Yang's head, and his voice sank slightly. Wen Yan's face turned red and she shyly said, Actually, it's not that. It's because of my poor physical condition, thin uterine wall, and heart surgery when I was a child. It could be dangerous anytime and anywhere, which is why Zhou is so nervous. Don't mention this, Teacher Nan. Let's add a WeChat account. You are Qingqing's homeroom teacher, and you can communicate with me about anything related to Qingqing in the future. She is a parent of a student. As a homeroom teacher, Nan Yang naturally cannot refuse. The 2 of them added WeChat, and Nan Yang noticed that Wen Yan's profile picture was the backlight of He Yuzhou. If she had read it correctly, the light-colored sweater on his body was still bought by her, which was quite expensive, with a monthly salary. She begged him for a long time before he was willing to wear it. At that time, I felt it was as sweet as sugar. I only feel a chill now. But then I'll come back to it. It's not easy for Wen Yan to get pregnant with such a heavy body. Forget it. Men are the ones who behave recklessly, why do women bother women? If Wen Yan suddenly found out the truth and the adults and children who were stimulated were not good, let alone her conscience. It is estimated that He Yuzhou will execute her 9 tribes. Her unrewarding brother's job was still found by He Yuzhou, so she didn't need to rush to minimize her own interests. Wen Yan stood up and said, Zhou, Teacher Nan, I'll go to the restroom. She slowly walked towards the bathroom. Nanyang looked at He Yuzhou, who suddenly sat down in surprise and said, Are you not with us? The latter squinted his eyes and said lazily, I don't have that habit. After a pause, he reminded, Today is Saturday. I know, Nanyang sighed without much emotion, your dad called in the morning and asked me to take you back to dinner tonight. He Yuzhou's voice sank a bit. Nanyang. I almost forgot about this matter. My head turned and I said, I can't take the initiative to come find you just because of this small matter. I can still handle it on my dad's end. He Yuzhou. Just rely on you. Nanyang deliberately raised her eyebrows and said provocatively, I just said you had an affair with a married woman and got your leg broken. You need to rest for 10.5 days, so my dad can even accept a divorce. Defamation of me, Teacher Nan. Half true, half false. Teacher Nan's plan is clever, but I want to eat the oil-braised shrimp made by your father. Nan Yang sounded an alarm in her heart, staring at He Yuzhou and threatening in a low voice, "You can't go." He Yuzhou leaned closer to her ear and said, "Are you begging me?" He took every inch to embrace her slender waist, his fingers gently caressing her body, as if the owner was treating a pet cat with no desire, just boring comfort, just passing the time. Nan Yang held on to his dishonest hand and angrily kicked him. "He Yuzhou, why are you lingering? A man who promised not to meet before divorce and doesn't keep his word is in his pants." He Yuzhou asked forcefully, "Are you saying you're looking for me? The divorce agreement is invalid. Does the agreement say I can't find you? Damn it. Doing business with capitalists can easily lead to being buried if not careful. Say it." He suddenly leaned over and pinched Nan Yang's chin, whispering softly to her ear, "Also, before the divorce, only you were Mrs. He, and I was your husband." Nan Yang fiercely knocked his head. His stiff forehead collided with He Yuzhou's tall and deep bridge of the nose, causing him to frown in pain. "Nan Yang." Nan Yang quickly moved her body and said, "You asked for it yourself. The beauty is on your side. What are you doing with me?" Wen Yan walked slowly back. Seeing a seat separated between Nan Yang and He Yuzhou, she sat down with a smile and said, "Zhou, why is your nose bridge so red?" He Yuzhou instinctively stroked his nose and said, "I accidentally bumped into it." Wen Yan had just raised her hand to help him knead it when He Yuzhou suddenly stood up. She could only look up at him and gently said, "In the future, you should be aware that there was one time in high school when you were holding a basketball and didn't know what you were looking at. You bumped into a power pole and were laughed at by them for a long time." As she spoke, Wen Yan turned towards Nan Yang and said, "Teacher Nan, do you think men have been careless since they were young? Unlike us women, I have been helping him clean up behind his buttocks since I was young. Outsiders say I am his little green plum, but in reality, I am his little nanny. It is obvious that, little nanny, is a representative of intimacy. After all, when Wen Yan speaks, her eyes are bright and shining." Nan Yang listened silently, feeling that she could keep her heart as calm as water. However, upon hearing these words, her heart was hit hard with a slight blush in her eyes. She lowered her head to cover it up, pursed her lips tightly, strong yet fragile. They are childhood sweethearts. And she is a malicious female supporting figure who takes advantage of the situation with a purpose. Even if the prince marries a malicious female supporting character and the plot deviates, the beautiful plot belonging to the princess prince will eventually be corrected, and the malicious female supporting character will certainly become cannon fodder. The emotional abuse of the heart came to an end at the moment when Bai Miao came out. Nan Yang couldn't wait to get up and said, "Bai Miao, here." Bai Miao walked over with a backpack on his back and said, "Teacher Nan, it's over. You can go home now." Nan Yang coughed lightly and cleared her voice, "Miss Wen, I will send you the bill later. Let's go first." Nan Yang left with Bai Miao. Entering the elevator, Bai Miao looked worried at Nan Yang and said, "Teacher Nan, are you crying?" Nan Yang shook her head and said, "The window is open in the hallway, and sand just blew into her eyes." "How is the doctor's psychological counseling?" Bai Miao pursed her lips and smiled, "Teacher Nan, thank you for bringing me here. I feel that my heart has been broadened, and the knot that has been hidden in my heart for many years has also been lifted. Teacher Nan, I am very lucky to have met you." Nan Yang touched her head. Bai Miao was the top student in the city during the high school entrance examination. She was snatched by a prestigious school with a scholarship of 200,000 yuan. She was also a hardworking little girl, with her mother running away and her father being a gambler. So Nan Yang has been taking care of her a bit more. Nan Yang knew that the only weapon a girl like Bai Miao could wield to fight against fate was just learning. This was the most direct way for her to escape from the sea of suffering. What Nan Yang had to do was to protect her. After sending Bai Miao back, Nan Yang drove towards her mother's house. She was thinking of reasons all the way. I can't really tell my dad that He Yuzhou's affair broke his leg. Nanping lives alone in an old community, which is much older than Nanyang. There is no elevator, and he lives on the second floor, which is less than 70 square meters. There are 2 bedrooms and 1 living room, which Nan Yang bought for him with all his savings. Climb to the second floor. Nan Yang practiced an impeccable smile at the door and knocked on the door. As soon as the door opens, Nan Yang shouted crudely, "Dad." However, "Open the door, where is Nanping?" He Yuzhou wore a beige knitted sweater paired with a pair of grey home pants, as if returning to his own home, with a smile in his eyes. Role-playing. Chapter 9. Treating He Yuzhou as Yilang. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After being shocked, Nan Yang pulled him out and jumped angrily, "Are you full? What are you doing here?" He Yuzhou also held half a paper walnut in his hand, and he calmly peeled it off. "Dad is on the phone, it's hard to refuse," he said, "you put." The indecent words were eventually swallowed by Nan Yang, staring at the sharp gaze of He Yuzhou. She turned her head and said, "Aren't you looking for a reason? What kind of big-tailed wolf are you pretending to be? You have the best way to refuse." In the past, Nanping often called the couple to come for dinner on weekends. He either made an appointment with a client, or went on a business trip. In any case, he found various excuses and didn't repeat them. It's difficult to be a ghost in a romantic relationship. He did it on purpose. Add traffic to her. She was so angry that He Yuzhou stuffed half a walnut into her mouth and said, "If you don't speak, no one will treat you as mute." At this moment, Nanping pushed open the door and said, Yang, you've finally arrived. I'm afraid you're driving on the road, so I didn't even dare to call to urge you. The food is ready, why are you two standing outside?" He Yuzhou followed closely behind Nanping and deliberately provoked her when he entered, "How dare you pretend to be a stone at the door?" Nan Yang walked in with a stinky face and changed into slippers. The living room and dining room are connected, and Nan Yang heads straight to the dining table. Taking advantage of Nanping's lack of attention, she pinched a peanuts and ran away to wash her hands. There was a watermark on the ground that didn't dry, and Nan Yang's slippers slipped on the soles of her feet. Her feet flew out, and her body, unable to keep up with the speed, fell heavily. Yang. Nanping quickly charged forward. But his old arms and legs couldn't run as fast as He Yuzhou. He Yuzhou stopped and stabilized Nan Yang, scattering his chopsticks on the ground. She slammed her back heavily against his chest, and He Yuzhou frowned, "Nan Yang, your bones are really hard." Nanping saw that his daughter was fine, so he squatted down to pick up chopsticks and said with a smile, "This girl has been tough since childhood, has a stubborn temper, and has a good idea." Nan Yang's heart stopped unexpectedly and thundered. She smiled bitterly and pushed He Yuzhou away with force. After washing her hands, she returned and sat at the dining table. The smile on Nanping's face never disappeared. He took out his long-cherished red wine from the bottom of the cabinet, and the dark bottle was wrapped in layers of newspapers. He opened it in circles and said, "That kid from Qianfan sent it over last time. He said it was a 1991 Lafite, and I'm waiting for you to come and open the bottle." "Thank you, Dad," He Yuzhou said with a stylish appearance. Nanping vigorously pulled out the cork of the wine with a bottle opener, poured a glass for He Yuzhou first, and then poured it for himself. Nan Yang immediately snatched a glass and said, "Dad, he can't drink. He has to drive after dinner." He Yuzhou remained silent, only looking towards Nanping. Although he was an old man, he looked like green tea at the moment. Nan Yang's anger didn't come from anywhere, and due to Nanping's presence, he could only suppress it and say, "Dad, drunk driving will revoke your driver's license." Nanping personally poured another cup and put it over. Let Xiaohe sleep at home tonight, anyway, there is your room at home. Nan Yang. In the end, He Yuzhou and Nanping drank up a bottle of red wine together. After dinner, he sat on the sofa with a slight headache. The grape quality in 1991 was not good, and there was no wine made that year. Where did 91 Lafite come from? It's just fake alcohol. He's up there. He Yuzhou leaned against the sofa and closed his eyes. Nanping pushed his daughter's arm and said, Yang, Xiao he is drunk. Take him back to his room quickly. Nan Yang tugged at He Yuzhou's arm and said, get up. Nanping angrily said to Nan Yang, take it easy. Drunk people already have a headache, and with such a tug, they feel like vomiting. Nan Yang is speechless. She knows how much alcohol He Yuzhou has, and can just half a bottle of wine make him like this. Who are you fooling? Install. A 1,000-year-old fox plays the role of Liaozhai with her father here. Nan Yang tugged at him with one hand and secretly pinched his waist with the other, putting in a lot of effort to drag the person into the room. As a result, when he fell into bed, he grabbed her and made a back cushion. He Yuzhou, don't pretend, Nan Yang said, feeling as if she had been pressed against a wall and her chest was hurting from being squeezed. He Yuzhou had a headache and was about to crack. His robust body pressed against her and he complained, your father's wine is fake. Nan Yang didn't doubt him. After all, Nankingshan is a well-known iron rooster, and it is not surprising that such behavior is a common occurrence. But even if he drinks fake alcohol, he can't play hooliganism. Nan Yang pushed him, but couldn't move. She whispered, He Yuzhou, you won't die, will you? He Yuzhou was infuriated by her and stood up with both hands, looking down at him from a high position. His deep eyes sparkled with light, reflecting a brilliant diamond-like spot. Did eating a crane's head turn red? Before Nan Yang could react, he had already kissed her. Alcohol surged with desire, and his dark eyes flowed with countless strands of love, trying to entangle her. He despised the noise in the bed and carried her to the dressing table, never separating. The defense line in Nan Yang's heart was shattered by his familiar instigation and killing. She softened into a puddle of water, with tears in her eyebrows and eyes. Tears filled her with spring sentiment, and her tightly bitten lips were washed away. The old man's skills and physical strength are outrageously good. Forget it. Unable to resist, why not close your eyes and enjoy it? A cowherd like He Yuzhou with good looks and abilities is probably worth a lot of money for a night. Nan Yang squinted her eyes and enjoyed the comprehensive service of a high-end cowherd. Before going to bed, I vaguely heard him whispering in a muffled voice against her neck, it's quite soft right now. Nan Yang thought to herself that before witnessing his infidelity with her own eyes, she had always been soft on him and had no temper at all. But he doesn't seem to remember, or rather, he never cared. The next day, the two of them accompanied Nanping for breakfast. After hearing Nanping's words and expressions at the dining table, they walked down the stairs side by side. Nan Yang got into his car, drove past him, slowly lowered the car window, and gave him a cold face wearing sunglasses. He Yuzhou, let's stop here. Immediately. She seemed to intentionally drive past him. He Yuzhou looked up at her running away and calmly climbed onto his own Kurinam. After going their separate ways downstairs in Nanping, the two did not meet for a week. Nan Yang was quite busy, so busy that she had no time to pay tribute to her dying marriage and love. That afternoon, Nan Yang received a call from Chu Qianfan, and she was taken aback before answering. Mr. Chu. Teacher Nan, it's me, Wen Yan. Wen Yan's energetic and sunny voice came out, very excited. Teacher Nan, didn't you disturb your blind date with Qianfan before? Today, I'll treat you to dinner with Qianfan. You must come. I have to watch evening self-study tonight, Nan Yang refused without hesitation when Yan exclaimed, I heard from Qin that she will have an exam tomorrow and relax tonight without evening self-study. Teacher Nan, is it because I am here that you don't want to come? Do you not like me? She asked cautiously, and just by listening to her voice, one could tell how aggrieved her expression was. Nan Yang patted her forehead and said, No, the director left me with some work. I'll call your director and ask him to let him go, Wen Yan said, looking like Xiao Chang who can't fight to death. Nan Yang still refused, Miss Wen, I want to enjoy my post-work life alone. I'm sorry. She quickly hung up. She didn't understand, could these young ladies not hear any good words and didn't understand what a gentle refusal was. However, 10 minutes later, Nan Yang received a message from He Yuzhou. Number 1 chamber in heaven and earth, otherwise the agreement will be invalidated. With a loud bang, Nan Yang slammed her phone onto the table with a cold face. Teacher Li Yun, who came in, was startled. Since joining the company, Nan Yang has never had a black face. Now, with a cold face, her delicate little face is cold and distant, and a sense of unfamiliarity is coming towards her, which is quite intimidating. Teacher Nan, what's wrong? It's okay, I'm so angry about changing my homework. They are all petty bullies who love to work and are difficult to control. They have a strong mouth and cannot fight or scold. Let's consider ourselves unlucky. Yeah, when you meet a jerk, you can only consider yourself unlucky. In order to never see him again in the future, I can only endure nausea and go see him now. After work, she drove to the famous sales cave in heaven and earth. I pushed open the door of the first compartment on time. But Nan Yang didn't expect so many people. Apart from knowing 3 people, there are also 5 unfamiliar faces, 3 men and 2 women. Nan Yang's slender fingers holding the door handle tightened, and her fair and bony joints reflected slightly under the sparse fence light. Bai Yueguang, a stranger in the face, knew Nan Yang and was one of the few who knew about Nan Yang in He Yuzhou. Therefore, he instinctively thought that Nan Yang was called by He Yuzhou and wanted to stand up to greet her. After all, she is the youngest wife of He Yuzhou. Since she has been waiting on him for 2 years, she should have a humble face even if she has no feelings. However, halfway through Bai Yueguang's gesture of getting up, he saw Wen Yan walking over with a smile on her face. Bai Yueguang's expression exploded. Former and current, Qin Mei and wife, where did this come from? Wen Yan affectionately pulled Nan Yang's arm and said, Let me introduce Nan Yang, Qianfan. She deliberately lengthened her voice, creating an ambiguous atmosphere. Qianfan's good friend is also my good friend. Bai Yueguang quickly stole a glance at He Yuzhou. He sat in the middle, under the flickering light, half bright and half dark, unable to see his face clearly. Chapter 10 She said. Qianfan, help me. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Bai Yueguang playfully curled his lips, which was so interesting. Wen Yan was originally sitting between He Yuzhou and Qianfan. Now, she immediately pressed Nan Yang in her previous position. To the left of Nan Yang is Qianfan, and to the right is He Yuzhou. She is restless and restless. Wen Yan seems to be trying her best to compensate Qianfan for the blind date she messed up last time. After arranging for Nan Yang, she wants He Yuzhou to move to the right. Bai Yueguang doesn't mind the excitement. He is on the right side of He Yuzhou, and there is an empty seat in the middle. At this moment, he took a photo of the empty seat and said, Wen Yan, here. Wen Yan lowered her eyes and sat over with a smile. Qianfan spoke apologetically and whispered to Nan Yang, I'm sorry, I didn't expect Wen Yan to call you. It was too late for me to stop you. If I can't accept it, I'll find a chance to take you away. It's okay, Nan Yang said with a gentle and harmless smile as she pinched the corner of her clothes. Bai Yueguang clicked and said, You treat us like outsiders. What kind of whispers can't we hear? Nan Yang keenly noticed that He Yuzhou's gaze quickly turned towards this side, but could not distinguish whether it was intentional or unintentional. Nan Yang looked at Bai Yueguang and raised her eyebrows. Since it's a secret conversation, how can you hear it? Bai Yueguang said discontentedly, you just smiled so beautifully at Qianfan brother, why are you having a cold eye with me? He Yuzhou deviated from the angle of his gaze, his eyes clear and clear, like deep pools. Duan Inkstone. Brother, you said. Go sing. He Yuzhou Lingbuting said this sentence. Bai Yueguang thought that his interests and hobbies were being respected. He was about to show off his singing enthusiasm when he heard him say, I'll leave tonight's background music to you. Nan Yang couldn't control her lips. What the dog man did made her feel happy. What kind of Duan Yan? Since she came in, her attitude and gaze towards her have been a bit strange. That sentence just now even made her stand up, and she was still worried about how to try not to offend him too shamelessly. Sing all night. Bai Yueguang almost cried, picked up the microphone with a limp expression, and began singing. Wen Yan swayed her head along the melody and suggested, without the Duan Inkstone, we happen to be 8 people. How about playing mahjong for 2? The other 2 girls eagerly agreed, all right, it's been a long time since I played mahjong, my hands are craving. Nan Yang first made a bottom line with Chu Qianfan, I'm not very good at playing, I might lose very miserably. Chu Qianfan smiled and said, don't be afraid, there's me. With a loud bang. The lottery draw was thrown by He Yuzhou in the middle of the mahjong table, drawing lots. Wen Yan glanced at He Yuzhou with a smile on her face, let's catch it together. It's more fun to set up a temporary outfit. She took the lead in drawing a red arrow and gave Nan Yang a science lecture, we girls draw red. Nan Yang waited quietly until the end, only she and He Yuzhou didn't smoke, there was still 1 red and 1 blue, and she smoked red. Others showed that only Nan Yang was alone, which means she and He Yuzhou are going to make a pair. She let out a barely audible sigh. When she got up to change her position, Nan Yang suddenly realized that her waist was being held, and a muffled and burning voice was attached to her ear. I'm not with Chu Qianfan, I'm very disappointed, Nan Yang's ears itched, and she raised her hand to scratch. The person who had just spoken had already kept a distance from her. There is a problem. Nan Yang sat on the small sofa, with the man sitting on the backrest sofa at the back, holding onto her like an inescapable claw, causing Nan Yang to sit restless. The mahjong game is in full swing. All of Nan Yang's attention was focused on her card face, except for the palm that was attached to her waist, which diverted her focus. He caressed her piece by piece, casually and rhythmically, and soon became unsatisfied with it. His cool fingertips lifted away her hem. Coincidentally, Bai Yueguang adjusted the lighting to be dim and confusing. He is becoming more and more extravagant. Fingertips lingered on her slightly sunken and sexy spine, thinking that every time he entered from behind, he would be attracted by the clear and translucent groove on her back. Kissing her would make her tremble, a reaction to touching a sensitive spot. It's been a while since I last saw her. I wanted to see her tonight. So I forced her to come. But seeing her and Chu Qianfan biting their ears, talking and laughing, he was unhappy. Did Nan Yang really treat him as dead? Nan Yang tightened her body and gritted her teeth several times, Mr. He, how do you think I can get out? He Yuzhou glanced at her, casually pointed to her, and Nan Yang put it out. Wen Yan happily took it and said, who? Nan Yang panted heavily. It's hard to doubt that he didn't mean it, spy. Internal ghost. The punishment for the loser is to drink a glass of wine. She picked up the glass and drank it all in one gulp, keep going. Midway. Nan Yang suddenly couldn't see her card face clearly. She forcefully closed her eyes and then opened them again, still like this. She doesn't have a tolerance for drinking just one glass. So. Is there a problem with the wine? She pursed her lips and suddenly stood up, Mr. He, you play a game, I'll go to the restroom. 10 minutes later, before Nan Yang could return, Qianfan felt uneasy and said, "I'll go see Nan Yang." "Wen Yan, you can play this game yourself first." Wen Yan said hello with a kind understanding. The mahjong game continues. Time passed by minute by second, and Bai Yueguang's voice was hoarse. Qianfan had not yet returned. Bai Yueguang held the microphone and his voice was infinitely amplified. "Why hasn't Qianfan come back yet? He's probably going to open a house, right? He Yuzhou made a mistake and threw a card." The opponent couldn't wait to eat it and said, "One color, who?" He Yuzhou pushed down the mahjong card and said, "You guys play." He stood up and walked out with his long legs staggered. Wen Yan gently brushed her fingers across her lower abdomen. The male and female restrooms shared a sink, and He Yuzhou stood in the aisle, walking 2 steps closer to the restroom with a small skirt sign hanging on it. "Qianfan." The man's gaze instantly darkened. The sweet and warm voice that drifted in was like a cat's meow, delicate and sticky. He could only hear her voice like this during his bed party. What are she and Qianfan doing inside? Does she still remember her identity? At this moment, He Yuzhou set aside his manners and bottom line, and walked straight in. In the only half-open compartment, he saw Nan Yang sitting on the toilet, her exposed skin showing abnormal redness. Her clothes on her chest seemed to have been maliciously torn and scratched, with fingerprints everywhere. "She is the only one. Nan Yang. Chu. Can you see clearly who I am?" As the name was about to be pronounced out of her mouth for the second time, He Yuzhou pinched her chin and forced her to look up. Nan Yang's body was plagued by evil fire, and she only remembered Qianfan anxiously comforting her at the door just now, saying that she was going to buy medicine for her and asked her to wait for him. She thought it was Qianfan who helped her buy medicine back, and instinctively murmured, "Mr. Chu, give me."